All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke with our round 2 DFS stream out there for the Open Championship. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure with a look at a strategy for Friday's slate, also a weather report as well. We'll go through any player deep dives, any questions with the process that you got for me in the chat. Overall, everything that you need to have yourself a Friday, but hopefully this week is treating you guys nicely so far. Any of you I saw for yesterday's live stream, welcome back. And anyone where this is the first time you're joining the SHIPIT Nation crew, we're glad to have you as well. The first thing I need you guys to do is to smash the like button if you haven't already. Also, don't feel shy at all to say hi in the chat if you guys haven't already. And any player pool deep dives and any questions that you've got, we're going to touch on a little bit later. But we got Michael Rice, Go Collect in the chat already, some early sweaty tryhards in the chat. What's going on? We got Warshot, also Colin down there, Mike as well. C. Floyd, Heart making one live. Always see you in the Discord, but nice to see you in the live chat here as well. We got Rin down there too, and you said you don't have to have EVR to ship it for you. Yeah, I know he's playing the Barracuda this week, man. But hey, we've got some Open Championship stuff to touch on here. So glad to have you guys in here. Also got Zach Lewis in the live chat. Let's get this thing rocking, though. So the first thing I want to note is that the PM played easier today. And, you know, this is not what I expected to happen. I really didn't know what was going to happen with the weather. But you probably heard from all the touts this week that the AM was going to be easier than the PM today. And the exact opposite happened. So the reason why we go back to this is I don't really think it has that much of a bearing on tomorrow. But it shows you how unpredictable Scotland can be. And that's why I didn't play the weather as a big part of my process this week. Actually even stacked the PM AM side, which seemed a little bit counterintuitive. And I even thought that there had to be a delay for that side to get the better side of it. But oh boy, was I wrong. It was a 1.3 stroke advantage today. So the forecast really was off from where a lot of the meteorologists had the models. Ended up being a little bit calmer in the afternoon than what they called for. And also the rain tapered off earlier than they expected. So that's partially just because of weather being extremely volatile, but also the nature of playing an Open Championship. So, you know, for next year, when we have a main slate, right, it's what I went with for this year. And even last year, I didn't play a big weather edge. It seems to be the prudent thing to do at this point is either to play both sides, don't play a weather edge at all. And even if you're going to try and play a weather edge, just know what you're getting yourself into with this Scottish and Irish weather that we have this week. And for tomorrow, it's a little bit of a different situation. So the Friday forecast does look, at least in my opinion, like it favors the later starters. But I think there's a little bit of unknown and variance involved. So when we go through these models, what we're going to see in general is that the AM has the higher winds. The sustained winds and the wind gusts are a little bit more significant in these AM models. But the PM is where you have some rain coming through. So the decision that we're going to have to make on which side plays easier is rather these guys would rather play in like a 10 to 15 miles an hour wind, or if they would rather play in slightly drizzly conditions without a whole lot of wind. It's one or the two. You know, it's not like it has to be one or the other because we're going to have guys that are teeing off in the middle that get a little bit of both conditions. But when we're looking towards the very early starters, towards the very late starters, that's the kind of question that we're asking ourselves. And, you know, as I previously mentioned, I think the PM side might be the side that gets the slate lean, just because if it were up to me, we go back to some of the other events and, you know, scoring averages in general, normally if it's just rainy and there's no wind out there, they can take advantage of the soft conditions. They can throw darts into greens and it's not that big of a problem. When it's usually windy, it's a little bit of a problem at times, but it's not as big of an issue. The problem is when it's windy and it's rainy. So the way that I read this, there's a couple different ways. PM, I think, might be the side that gets like a half a stroke advantage at most. I don't think it's going to be the 1.3 stroke advantage that you had today. It was not only the fact that the winds went down in the afternoon, but also the fact that it wasn't as rainy. tomorrow, you have those two contracting factors, right? Sure, it's not going to be as windy in the afternoon, but now it's going to be a little bit more rainy. So even if it does play a little bit easier, it's not going to be over a stroke difference like we had for round one. That was the most extreme example that we could have possibly done. It's probably going to be closer to a half a stroke, as I was mentioning. But the other thing I want to throw out here is that if it's raining and it's windy, let's say about midday, is maybe the mid tee time starters are the ones that you actually want to stay away from. And maybe either want to go to the really early morning guys or to the really late PM guys, because in that case, right, you could say like, okay, if they're going off super early in the morning, it's not supposed to rain. So they're going to be playing in wind at the very worst. And then if you go to the very latest starters, I mean, they have tee times the whole way until like 4 PM. I mean, it's ridiculous at the Open Championship. If you take those guys, you know that they're probably not going to be playing in really any wind at all. And it's mostly going to be that drizzle that they're dealing with. So maybe that's the best way to go about playing this kind of slate. I haven't built my player pool yet. I haven't completely settled on my strategy, but it's not looking like weather is going to be the end all be all for me. And like I said, maybe a slight lean with tiebreakers towards the guys that are in the second half of those tee times. But I think it might even be more nuanced than that, right? It might be that we want as late of a starter as humanly possible, like the last 2.5 hours. And there's no waves at this event. So it's continuous tee times. We have to treat it a little bit differently. Maybe we go to the last 25% of tee times and call that the quote unquote weather edge, and then play the rest of our lineups like 2 to 3 other spots in that lineup straight up with guys that are teeing off wherever. We're going to have to figure out exactly what I choose to do with the weather in this kind of slate, but it's something to keep an eye on. I don't think it's an exact science. I think you could look at this any one of two, multiple different ways. It just to show you guys the modeling, they all pretty much agree at this point. So the UKV has the higher winds in the morning, and then you can see the winds kind of tailing off a little bit, and more so of that rain that is coming through. This icon model's the same exact thing. Maybe the rain coming in a little bit earlier than what you had in the UKV and that GFS. If we go through the Medio Blue, same exact story, a little bit less rain, I'd say. So this would be the most favorable model for the PM wave. This one looks like not that much rain and then just lower winds compared to the morning. And then ECM, is the one model that we haven't looked at yet. This one probably looks the flattest out of all of them. It's not a big difference wind-wise between morning and afternoon. You even have a little bit of rain towards the morning wave as well in this ECM model. So, like I said, nothing definitive here, especially when we see something like this ECM model, which is kind of different than all the other ones that we were looking at. I think it's one where you could lean into a weather edge that you potentially see, or you could play no weather edge at all. And I really wouldn't have too much pushback in either direction, because must I remind you guys, right? This is Scotland, and the quote unquote wrong wave got a 1.3 shot advantage today. So, tomorrow it could be the same exact story, right? We could think the PM guys are going to get better conditions because of the fact that it's not going to be as windy. And then it might be rainy and windy tomorrow afternoon, right? The forecast could end up being completely wrong, which is why I'm not as confident. A lot of times these showdown streams, guys, I am a lot more confident in saying that one side will play easier than the other. That's just not the case when we're playing these Open Championship setups. So that's the weather, a little bit more of a longer weather section than what we typically do. But I think it's warranted given where we're playing on a week like this and how big of an impact that it had for round one. And it's not like you only had guys shooting -3, -4s from the late part of tee times. But it was a little bit more skewed that way. So like, for example, Harris English, Christian Bezainhout were guys that went off a little bit later. And then especially when you get to these like -2s, -3s, there's far more of them that went off in the PM wave. But you still had your Matt Fitzpatricks, your Scotty Schefflers that shot respectable scores early. I believe Matthew Jordan had a relatively early tee time. Don't quote me on that one, though. I might be wrong on Jordan. But you also had a few players that went off in the morning wave that got to -2 as well. So it was, even with a 1.3 stroke advantage, it wasn't the end all be all, but it was helpful, especially if you were trying to break some of those 50-50 ties. So weather, always something you want to keep an eye on for a showdown slate. But sometimes it's not as straightforward as what we would like. The other thing I want to talk about would be ownership, which we still have play finishing up. So ownership is not finalized on my Patreon page yet, or over there on the SHIPIT Nation site. But what we will say, I mean, we have a general idea of where a lot of this ownership is going to come in, is it highly correlates to the main slate ownership. So a lot of the players that you saw saw as chalk for the main slate. If they shot anything like, let's say, even par or better today, then they're probably still going to be chalky for round 2 showdown, but then also the top end of the leaderboard. So not just your chalk that played okay round 1, but also the guys that are starting in that top 10. This isn't round 4 showdown where that kind of makes sense. Round 4 showdown is a little bit different than rounds 2 and 3. Round 4, you get credit for your starting position. You get placement points for round 4 showdown. Rounds 2 and 3, like what we're playing for Friday, don't have that placement point aspect. But the interesting component of the ownership and what you see with the game theory and what everyone else is doing is that they play like you have those placement points. Like it matters that they're starting in the top 5, top 10. And it does help out form-wise. It's nice to see somebody that's maybe ball striking it well over the first 18 holes. But we also have to remind ourselves that it's only an 18-hole sample size. It's a 72-hole event. Golf is one of the most variant sports that you can possibly handicap. So if somebody's going to be 2 to 3 times the ownership, a lot of these guys starting in the top 5, top 10 are going to be double at the very least, like double the ownership compared to a lot of the other players around them. Sometimes 3 to 5 times higher owned than some of the other players priced in that same sort of bucket. They're almost automatic fades because of that. You know, one round, one good day of form doesn't make them Superman, doesn't make them worthy of playing in almost all of your lineups to try and get leverage, which means maybe not everyone towards the top. I would say that the T10s are better, or what I mean by the quote unquote top of the board. These guys that are -2 or better, I'm not fading every single one of them in my exposure. Haven't built my player pool yet. So I guess in theory, I could be fading all of them, but that's very unlikely. There will probably still be a few players that I'm getting over the field on that played really good round 1, but they're going to be limited. And they're going to be players that I really like with the shots gained metrics. We're about to go through the shots gained metrics. That's a way that you can use the round 1 data to try and make your player pool for round 2 showdown. But unless you're completely in love with what you're seeing, he's a player that you maybe bet outright this week. He played well round 1. He's on the right side of tee times for whatever you're looking at, right? And you really want to lean into that with that narrative. Unless there's nothing, right, working against that play. You probably want to fade a lot of these guys towards the top. So ownership, of course, that'll be posted on my Patreon page a little bit later on this evening. Actually, about 30 minutes after this live stream ends is when I plan on having that up on my site. SHIPIT Nation, of course, will also have their ownership projections posted for round number 2. Having a subscription to a site like mine or the SHIPIT Nation website is absolutely vital when you're playing round 2 showdown, because for somebody like me, it's a little bit more straightforward to know where the ownership's coming in. I make projections for every single showdown round. I play showdown myself. I'm a pro. I've been doing this for 5-6 years professionally. So I maybe have a little bit of a better sense of where that ownership's coming in. So it's a slight blind spot of mine, right? Kind of overestimating the knowledge of a lot of newcomers to DFS, but that's what the ownership projection is great for, right? Somebody like myself or the great team at SHIPIT Nation that puts together the projections for their site is able to give you guys that knowledge, you know, an idea of what the rest of the field is likely to do so that you can make those game theory decisions. So if you're newer to DFS, I would say it's even more so important to have a subscription to a site like mine or SHIPIT Nation so that you can see where all of that steam is coming in and that you can account for it elsewhere. So we're going to mention a lot more about the ownership later. I just wanted to prime it with where a lot of the field is going to be coming in so that when we build lineups a little bit later on, we're going to build at least one together on DraftKings. You guys get an idea for maybe why we're avoiding some of these guys at the top here. So what I'd like to look at with the shots gained metrics, and by the way, any player pool deep dives, make sure you throw them in the chat. After we go through the shots gained, ball striking, and some short game stats, we're going to be going through any of those specific players that you want me to go through. But the first thing that I use from the round 1 stats, and another little asterisk before we start doing this is not the only way that I get to my player pool. I always like to say this because I feel like people that are maybe newer to watching my live streams might get a little bit lost in the sauce with the numbers a bit. We're going to talk a lot about analytics here, guys that I like maybe that set up well for the next day. This is just one data point that we're using to our advantage. Like the stat profile could look great on someone, but if they're 25% owned tomorrow, like I could give fuck all about that. I'm not going to play them at 25% owned, especially if it's like a 6-7K guy that is way over owned because of how he played today. You can't just look at the stats in a vacuum. You've got to consider the ownership angle, and you've also got to consider stats that are outside of today. For example, regular raw projection, that matters on a showdown slate. course history. I like to look for high upside, high birdie percentage players because round 2 and 3 showdown, where we don't have the placement points, it is all about the raw amount of birdies that you can post, birdie streaks, maybe a bogey-free round gets you an extra 5 points. That's rare at a major championship course like this, but especially at a major championship course like this, it's all about the raw amount of birdies you can post. If you can make 6-7 birdies, that is going to be a optimal or a near optimal GPP play, especially if you're not like Scotty or an 10, 11K guy, like you're for sure going to get there as a mid to lower tier guy with 6-7 birdies. You might want to focus on just raw birdie percentage, right? That's something that I do when I look for my plays. Course history, which is pretty limited here. We only have really the 1 year in 2019 to use at Royal Portrush, but maybe outside of just like regular quote unquote course history, you can look at links course history. So maybe you open it up a little bit on a week like this. You can take a look at regular Open Championships. You can take a look at also the Renaissance Club, the Genesis Scottish Open, right? That could be another way that you incorporate course history, even though we only have 1 year of quote unquote course history, right? You can be a little bit more creative about it, opening up the links. You can take a look at guys that gained strokes on shots gained fescue. Something that they have on the SHIPIT Nation Stone is round 2 historical. There are a bunch of different ways to getting to your player pool on top of the shots gained metrics that we go through here. So I just like to give that spiel maybe before we really get into the weeds right here and start talking about these, because this is 1/2 or even 1/3 of the process. So we're only starting here with the shots gained metrics. Again, don't overreact to an 18-hole sample size. Golf is variant enough to begin with, especially after one round. And it's the equivalent, by the way, of like completely wanting to redo your showdown lineups in NFL Showdown based on just 1/4 of play. And what I mean by that, and it's not even like you would get the points. Let's assume that in NFL Showdown slate that you built your lineup ahead of time, and then after 1/4, they said, we're going to wipe all the points and we're going to let you rebuild. And you decided to rebuild after that first quarter because it was a super running heavy script. And you're like, oh, you know what? I'm only going to play the running backs now. Well, we know what happens in NFL games, and maybe you're not as big of a football fan as I am, but follow me here. I trust me. This analogy is worth it. But they say they ran along the first quarter, then the teams make the adjustments for it. It doesn't mean that the rest of the game, right, that it's going to be a rushing heavy script, right? Teams make adjustments. Players get tired. There could be injuries, a whole bunch of things that throw it off. Golf's the same way. You gained ball striking round 1. It does not mean it's going to happen that same way for the next few days. So like in the case of that showdown lineup, right? You had, your lineup ahead of time, and then you can adjust it after the first quarter. You would be a complete fool to completely change your lineup after the first quarter. If they told you like, yeah, we're just going to reset the points and move on forward, you should probably want the same lineup for the last 3 quarters. That's the main piece of advice I guess I would give you there, is that, in this scenario, right, you're not getting the carryover points from round 1. The starting position doesn't matter whatsoever, right? It means nothing for round 2, what they did in round 1. Don't play all the chalk, all the guys that are starting in the top 5, top 10, like it means anything, like in the same exact parallel to what we had in the NFL Showdown example there. So these matter, but they aren't the end all be all. I just like to throw that out there because some people go a little bit overboard on it, in my opinion. So we got Aaron Rise, the number 1 ball striker in the field. He gained just under 5 strokes in the off the tee plus approach. Ball striking, by the way, is the combination of shots gained off the tee plus approach together. It's just literally adding those 2 raw numbers together. And it gives us a really good sense for how a player is swinging it. Obviously, your golf swing is what you use off the tee and with your iron play. And setting up birdie looks, keeping bogeys off of the board is heavily tied to your shots gained ball striking. And it's also looked at as the most consistent part of golf for any given round. And the reason why we say that is because your golf swing, your actual motion from round to round, is relatively repeatable. You go to your swing coach the week before an event, or try and work on your swing, work on a feel, and then carry that into an event. That's why players that after a crappy round will go onto the range and try and work out whatever issue it was, because if they can get the right feel on the range the night before, they oftentimes take that onto the golf course the next day. I mean, you've heard that 1,000 times before. Sometimes it's even a feel that they get just before they tee off. But ball striking in general, let's say that you were in a groove the day before, it's not 1-to-1 correlated to the next day. There's always going to be some variance in this 4-letter word sport that we have in golf. It's 4 letters, just like a lot of the cuss words out there for a reason. But it is the most predictable part of our sport. Like in this chaos, this sport filled with chaos, variability, and unpredictability, the most predictable aspect of it would be that ball striking. So that's why like an Aaron Rai, for example, that gained a whole bunch of ball striking, you'd want to give a bit of a boost to. But like the ownership before on these T10s are better, they're going to be so much higher owned than they should be. That's the case with Aaron Rai as well. He's getting a little bit of extra steam than he otherwise would have. It'd probably like in a vacuum be like 5 to 7% owned. Former winner here on the DP World Tour. He played the Aberdeen Scottish Open in one before he was a PGA Tour member. So I think some people would play him for that. He was already kind of popular for main slate too, right? I mentioned some of your more popular main slate players. If they played well, they're probably going to be chalk for round 2 showdown as well. So Aaron Rai might look like a really good play. And this is a perfect example of like one where I probably am not using him for round 2 showdown. He had a decent day today. He's going to be a little bit more steamed than I would like. And same thing with Lee Westwood. Like Westy, he played great here in 2019, by the way, but he's like 50 something years old now. So I just have a hard time thinking he's going to sustain that for more than one round. You know, you see guys like Zach Johnson. I guess he had a good Masters this year. So he had, you know, one counter example to this, I suppose. But usually you see him show up for like round 1, round 2, and then completely flame out for the rest of the event. Westwood at T10, he's going to be double, 3 times the ownership of what he was for main slate. And there were even people playing Westwood this week because of some of his recent live golf stuff. So, you know, a guy like Uriah Westwood, if ownership wasn't a thing, I would probably be using them in some of my lineups. But because ownership is a thing and we're playing showdown against the rest of the field, those kind of players aren't my favorites when it comes to your round 2 showdown. So the ones that I like to look at a little bit more would be ones that are sneakier ball strikers, ones that still hit the ball well, but maybe they didn't gain 5 strokes to the field, right? Because if you gained 5 strokes ball striking to the field, you're going to be chalk for the next round. So if we scroll down a little bit, we got to scroll down Harris right past that. He's -4. He's going to get some of that steam. Scotty Scheffler, no shit, is going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate. I don't know who Connor Graham is. Good stats, but I don't play people that I don't know. And I'm somebody that's very plugged in with golf. So if I don't know the guy, he's probably a random that hasn't done very much. But when we get down to like a Johnny Vegas, for example, he's a legit PGA Tour player. He's won over the last year or so. He's T45. He hit it well in both categories and lost in the short game categories. Like I could get behind that. A Joaquin Niemann at T20, he might be getting slightly more steam than what he did for main slate, but he ball struck it. He really hit it well today too. So like maybe I could get behind that. A Russell Henley at T45, he hit it well, but isn't really showing it with the score. He's +1 at this stage of the golf tournament. You know, these guys at T1, they're going to get the rightful steam that they probably should, but not so much these diamonds in the rough like a Matt McCarty, a Rahm at T20, kind of like a Neiman. He'll probably be a little bit over the average ownership as well. In fact, John Rahm will still probably be mega chalk because, you know, that mega chalk for main slate is still going to sustain a lot of that, especially if they shot anything under par. But your Dean Burmesters, your Romain Langas, your Jesper Svenssons of the world at T32 are really where I use these shots gained metrics to my advantage. So I haven't quite built my player pool yet. There's still a chance that some of those more ball striking heavy players that are chalky make their way into my player pool. Like for example, a Terrell Hatton, there's a good chance that like I still play him, especially if he's on the perceived side of the weather edge that I think ends up being the side that we should attack. But at T6, like either unless you love the play, unless he's a player up top where you're taking 35-40% of those guys up top anyways, right? It's not as big a deal, I guess, to play chalk when that's the case. But if you're talking about a 6 or 7K range player, I would much rather scroll down to that 1.5 to 2 shots gained ball striking range and find my ball striking poppers that way. So that's one way that I get to building my player pool. Another way that I use the shots gained metrics to my advantage is to take a look at the short game stuff. And unlike the ball striking, which tends to be more consistent, this short game is extremely variant. It is the most variant part of the sport. It changes wildly from day to day. And for example, a Tom Kim that gained 5 strokes putting today has no chance at hell in doing that 2 days in a row. He's not been a great putter this year. He's been maybe one of the worst putters in the entire field this year. And that's not even an exaggeration. He's been horrendous. Last month or so, it's been a little better, but especially early in the year, he was losing like a stroke per round on the greens. Him gaining 5 strokes putting is like a once in a yearly thing based on what he's been putting on recently. So, you know, he's not somebody that I would expect to pop 2 days in a row unless he's going to gain 5 strokes ball striking somehow, which could happen. You see people that just turn it on in those categories, but it's much harder to flip the switch with your ball striking than it is to flip the switch with the short game categories. A Takumi Kanaya that gained almost 4 strokes putting, a Davis Thompson, an Axelson, also a Nikolai Højgaard that gained over 3 strokes putting. These are players that are probably going to regress back to their mean a bit. And, the further down you go, the less and less that regression is as much of a problem. But if you were short game dependent, that's putting, and then also around the green is what makes up short game. Around the green is your chipping, and if you're going to gain 2 to 3 strokes chipping, that means that you're probably chipping in for birdie once or twice. These guys that chipped in once, twice on the round are not going to do that very often. It's just common sense if you play golf, but if you haven't played golf as much, making putts, they bobble all over the place on greens. PGA Tour a little bit less so than your local municipal course, but still a lot of variance on the lines just based on the imperfections that exist on them. Reading greens isn't something that isn't always consistent for players either. And then sometimes you just have harder putts than others. Like a downhill slider is infinitely harder to make than something that's uphill and maybe a right to left breaker. Like for example, the make rate on an uphill right to left breaker from 10 feet is higher than the make rate for a 6-footer that is downhill in a slider. And we don't have the exact analytics for that yet. That's why the shots gained to putting isn't an exact science, because it doesn't account for a lot of that stuff. But that's why when somebody gains 5 strokes in those 2 categories, that a lot of times it can be fool's gold. So, for example, a Jaeger, a Justin Leonard, a Matt Fitzpatrick, Grazerman, Darren Clark, and Thurston Lawrence, especially if they gain strokes across both of these short game categories, they're the kind of players that I'm probably not getting over the field on either. And the exact opposite is true as well. If we take a look at the guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes in these short game categories, they could be due for a little bit of regression in the opposite direction. So rather than it being a negative for these players, it can be looked as a positive in some cases. Now, it's not always a positive. Like in the case of Curtis Luck, the guy's old as hell. He's losing across all 4 categories. He's probably going to do that again. He sucked across the board. There's really nothing to lean into there. But however, if we take a look at this Richard Tedder guy, who's, I think, the Estonian, he's some young kid who hits the ball a metric mile. I was going to say something else a little bit more vulgar, but you get the point. Hits the ball a long way. This Richard Tedder kid, he gained ball striking and lost short game. That's the kind of guy maybe you could use for some short game regression. And it's because he showed some semblance of form, some kind of hope with those ball striking stats. Like this Connor Graham kid I mentioned, I have no idea who the hell he is. I don't even know who this Richard Tedder kid is either. So I'm probably not playing either one in my player pool, but their ball striking stats were at least half decent. So if you were going to look at a random guy, those, I guess, would be the 2 random guys to look at. But a Nicholas Norgard, right? He wasn't terrible in the ball striking categories. He was actually a little bit into the positive in those 2 categories. If you give me a neutral, then he lost 4-stroke short game, then that could be a short game regression candidate. A Stuart Sink, right? He could be a short game regression candidate. A Daniel Brown, an Adrian Sadier, somebody that gained 2 strokes in the ball striking categories. Those are the short game regression candidates that you're looking at. You're not just going to do it with some random slap dick, but with a Nick Taylor that you see there, the other Canadian was sneaking into the minds, but he lost over 4 strokes in the short game categories, but he gained in the 2 ball striking, right? Off the tee, slightly positive. Same thing with the approach play. That's another short game regression candidate that you could look at. And the added bonus with these guys is, it's a double-edged sword, I suppose. So it's a positive and a negative. The positive is, though, that they're lower owned. Nick Taylor, for example, no one's going to use his ass because he's +6. And maybe that's deservingly so because he's such out of form. But that lower ownership in those large field GPPs is also how you get differentiation. You make sure that you don't duplicate yourself with other lineups. And when you have a 1 to 2 percenter that gets there and is an optimal play, it's really nice to have a 1 to 2 percenter that's going off rather than somebody that's 25% owned, because they don't have 25% of the rest of the lineups that you're playing against with that same exact score. Then, it's a 5-on-5 and try and take down against a quarter versus the rest of the field. In the case of a Taylor, if he goes off, still very difficult thing to do. But let's say that he has that sort of optimal performance and you're sharing him with 1.5% of the field. It's just so much more utility to have that kind of player in your player pool. And it means a whole lot more for your end result. So that's why I like to use it for some of my, lower owned players. I also like to look at the high upside players as another way to get to some of the players that, maybe aren't as highly owned. And I'm actually going to bring up the PGA Tour site real quick. So just bear with me 1 second, guys. So I can show people that are maybe a little bit newer to these live streams where you can find this information. So if we go to the PGA Tour website, you click stats at the top, and then you go to scoring and scroll down to birdie or better percentage. You can see the people that made the most birdies on the PGA Tour. So number 1 is Justin Thomas, Sepp Straka up there, Scotty Scheffler, of course. But like a Harry Hall is, didn't have his best stuff today. Like he's the kind of guy that you could use as a bounce back candidate because of his birdie or better percentage. In like a lot of these guys like JT, Sepp, Scotty, like I guess they're going to get some ownership. Same thing with Højgaard. He had such a good round, but like a Colin Morikawa struggled. Right, but he makes a lot of birdies, so maybe he's somebody you use for a bounce back. Jesper Svensson, Kevin Yu didn't have his best stuff. Like when you're looking for those low owned, high upside plays, I think that's a really good way to do so. And then also course history. And, course history could be from 2019 at this golf course, or even whether it's the Links golf course history or using the Genesis Scottish Open. If you want to use that to try and find some of your lower owned plays as well, then that's kind of nice because, with those ball striking stats, some of them can be a little bit highly owned. So like, let's say, for example, a Terrell Hatton, a Harris English, really popping in your process. You just can't get off of those two players. That's why having the well-rounded player pool and not just looking for like one thing in your player pool is so key, because it gives you the ability to get to some high-owned players in some cases, and then some lower-owned plays that you can use to differentiate yourself. So that's the shots gained metrics. That's how I use them to my advantage. On my Patreon page, by the way, I'm very disciplined about the people that I use. And what I always say with your player pool, guys, is have a rhyme and reason for every single player that you're getting to, whether that's some random slapdick in the 6-7K range, whether it's a play in the 9-10K range. You should know exactly why you're using a player in your player pool. It could be, in my case, that they're a ball striking popper. They could be a short game regression candidate. We talked a whole lot about that with the shots gained metrics. High upside player, course history, as I mentioned as well. And on my spreadsheet, the content I do on Patreon, I have my player pool on there. Every single player is marked as one of those reasons on it, which is important, obviously, to convey the why of the content that I'm doing. But it's also important, and it's what you guys can take away and incorporate to your own process, is you should be building your player pool and be very intentional about what you're doing. You shouldn't be just randomly throwing guys into builds. You shouldn't be hand building and go like, oh, I like that name and throw it in. You should know before you're building who you plan on using, because you can also use that to your advantage when you're picking the contest that you want to enter too. If you have your player pool, you have an idea of who you want to use before you start reserving your contest. Let's say that you have a little bit too much chalk compared to what you normally have, then that's probably a better idea to place single entries in some cash lineups instead. Contests where ownership isn't as big a deal. Again, ownership, we're going to expand on here in just a minute. So if you're a newbie with that, and that was a little bit over your head, just stick with us. I'll explain it a little bit more in like 5-10 minutes, maybe like 15 minutes, because I'm assuming we're going to have some decent questions for this major championship live stream. But it matters a lot more in like the GPPs with the ownership angle, and not so much in those cash lineups and like the smaller field GPPs. So if your player pool is a little bit chalkier than you're used to, then just change your exposure up. Whereas if you're building your player pool and you really like a lot of high upside guys, you like a lot of players that are further down in the shots gained metrics than the guys in the top 5, top 10, then play more GPPs. Because if you have a lot of low-owned pieces that you're already planning on getting to, then you might as well take advantage of it in some of the larger field contests. So that's the shots gained metrics, a little bit longer than what we do. Let me get a sip of my coffee, and let's catch up on this live stream. So where we leave off, whole bunch of comments, a couple new people it looks like too. So if you're new, welcome on in, and hope you guys can subscribe, like the video as well if you guys haven't already. Lee Westwood, take it home, old daddy-o. Yeah, he's getting up there in age, but he's playing some good golf. That's for damn sure. What's going on, Mike? We got Rin down there as well. Let's see. I'm looking for the first question though. Where are we at? No questions. All right. Can you crank some birdies tomorrow? I think there's a chance. And I see what you did there, right? The little Soulja Boy reference with Kevin Yu. By the way, shout out to D-Jenny always. Did the U when we heard about Kevin Yu. Really tough shots gained profile, though. I mean, he's T150. So, I mean, the shots gained metrics are kind of like irrelevant at this point. which is another thing to add on top of this, guys. We talked about the shots gained metrics with like ball striking poppers and, the short game regression candidates. With like your high upside plays and your course history players, like a Kevin Yu, for example, like I could care less about like his shots gained metrics. Like if you're going to use a Kevin Yu, there's a clear reason why, and it's because he's going to have no ownership. So in large field GPPs, that would probably be like the best place to play somebody like a Kevin Yu, like in a big $5 or $25. And the thing I'll add with Kevin is that he makes a lot of birdies, at least compared to some of the other cheaper guys in this field. He's number 12 in birdie or better percentage. So that's why I say like the shots gained metrics almost don't matter on a player like that. It's all about the bounce back. And at +8, you could say that maybe he's going to be disengaged, not as conservative. Maybe he's going to play a little bit too aggressive with that kind of thing, but that's okay, right? Like, I mean, if he starts -3, -4 through 5 holes, I'm sure he's going to give a shit for the rest of his round. So I wouldn't worry about that one too much. Super duper long day for sure. I think it was like 14 hours of golf. So yeah, hopefully they pick up the pace at some point. It was a little bit of a tough scene, even like tracking on the app. It was taking them like 30, 40 minutes to finish a hole. Let's see. People, why are you guys being mean to these tour players? They didn't do anything to you. What do I think about Johnny Vegas? Let's look at the shots gained metrics, because the birdie or better percentage is decent too. He's not an elite tier birdie or better percentage guy, but when we are going through the shots gained metrics before, he was popping with the ball striking, and he lost almost 2 strokes in the short game categories as well. So he'd be a prime bounce back candidate, somebody that's hitting the ball, doing it in sustainable fashion, but could have been better on and around the greens. He sets up well stat-wise, and the difference, between him and some of the other guys starting in the top 20 is he's not going to be getting that same kind of steam. So large field GPPs could be a little bit of a lower owned play. So what are my top DFS plays for round 2? That'll be on my Patreon page, man. This live stream is much more process-based, not really a picks and plays live stream, if that makes sense. But I will say, if you have any players you want to throw by me, you want like the scoop on any shots gained metrics, that is what this live stream is for, though. So hit me up with any of those. Let me know if there's any players that you were kind of wanting to decide between, and we can do it that way. What's going on, Ernie? Guys that play good at PGA National are good here, or so you heard. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that one, man. And I'm not sure who said that, but I mean, it's a Florida golf course. I'm from South Florida. There is nothing in common with South Florida and Scottish links golf. However, there could be some leaderboard crossover. So maybe there's something to it that we don't really think of initially about those two golf courses. But I'm from Palm Beach. I've played PGA National 100 times or so. And I've got to say, I don't see any sort of resemblance between those two golf courses. So I'm personally not that big on that one. Thoughts on Niemann for round 2? So let's look at the shots gained. I mean, the ball striking was good, if I remember correctly, and he didn't putt the best. So I'd have to say that this is like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 stat profile, and the ownership's not going to be out of hand either. So there's going to be a really good chance that Niemann's in my player pool, as long as, the weather edge I still haven't decided on, which it's one of the only slates at this point where I really don't have an exact idea of how the weather's going to play out. As long as the weather's not working against him, he'll probably find his way into my pool, because even if he'll have slightly above average ownership, it's probably worth it on that kind of stat profile. The flip-flopping golf is important to understand. Yep, he's talking about the short game stuff, by the way. Me and Ernie are always tracking the guys that flip-flop in the short game. Around the green, too. It's insane, the kind of flip-flops that you see. So, yeah, let me know, by the way, Ernie, if you see any ones that happen after round 2. Thoughts on Bryson for round 2? So, yeah, I mean, he's going to be super low owned. So he's at least somebody you probably want to deep dive. So here, guys, let me fix my hat. A little bit uncomfortable there. He gained off the tee and he lost on approach, especially an approach, over 4 strokes in that category. That's a really tough scene. I know we don't have the live golf stats up, right? We can't go to the PGA Tour stats and find Bryson. He's the number 2 or 3 birdie maker that you have on the live tour. I know that Jon Rahm is number 1, I believe. Bryson's either 2 or 3 just behind Jon Rahm. So just like a Kevin Yu was number 12, and I kind of overlooked the shots gained metrics, you can kind of say that about Bryson, but the difference between Bryson and Kevin Yu is that Bryson's expensive. I mean, he's $10,000 on this slate. It's not like you're using him to save salary and spend up for a stud. There's a little bit more opportunity cost when you're using a stud that didn't play well, but there's a time and place for it. Like, I'm not 100% sure whether I'm going to have the room to take a Bryson, but when I'm going through my player pool process, there's probably going to be some guys up top like Haddon. I think there's a good chance I play him. Joaquin Neiman, already shouted him out as a player that I'm probably going to have some exposure to. If there's not too many guys up top that I'm overly in love with, then Bryson could sneak his way into my player pool. But he's not somebody that I'm going to be getting to initially. He's not going to be like one of my conviction plays if I were to have a Bryson. It would more so be like, I don't have enough guys towards the top. I need to take a shot on somebody low owned. And Bryson, of course, one of the highest upside players that we have in the world, would be a great player to use in that kind of scenario. So my thoughts on him are probably like a 5 out of 10, but a 5 out of 10 at low ownership can sometimes get the job done. So you're looking at Matty Schmid, I'm guessing there. So let's look at Matty Schmid's stats. He's another high birdie percentage player. So if we go back to the birdie or better list, I believe he's fallen off a little bit, but still number 30 on the PGA Tour is well above average in this sort of a field. In the shots gained metrics today, he gained just over 1.5 strokes in the ball striking and then lost about 1.5 short game. This is another one of those prototypical bounce back candidates where the ball striking was there. If he's a gainer in the short game categories, that would be a massive improvement. And what I'll say about Matty Schmid is that last week he played really well at the Scottish Open, same type of grass, fescue greens, and he gained 5 strokes putting over the week. So this type of grass, the type of agronomy that we have for Royal Portrush, is a spot in line with what he gained a whole bunch of strokes on last week. So that 1.5 strokes that he lost on the greens, pretty surprising for a Matty Schmid. So good call out on that one, man. He's as long as the ownership's not out of hand, probably getting added to my pool. You're looking at Tom Kim. Yeah, Tom Kim's got great Open Championship history. So let's show you the shots gained profile from today, right? He's the guy that gained 5 strokes putting. I hate that. I do not like the fact that he was so short game dependent. However, the course history, whether it's the course history, I guess not here, it'd be the Open Championship history or his Genesis Scottish history, is some of the best that we have in the entire field. Does that make up for the 5 strokes putting? Partially, right? But you're going to have to ask yourself, right, whether he's worth playing at slightly above average ownership now, because for main slate, he was like averagely owned. Not a whole lot of people took the plunge on him, which I'm glad for. I played him in main slate, so nice to see that he's sitting there at T10. But for Showdown now, he's going to be a little bit higher owned than what he was for main slate. And he's coming off a round where he gained to that 5 strokes putting. Like for me, it's going to be tough for me to get there, but I do have to say that the course history is a very, very favorable stat for him. It's in fact, probably the best course history that we have in the field. Schmid would be a 6.5 out of 10. I really like that stat profile. He said, everyone at +2 to +4 are cooked and will not make the cut. Is that true? I'm not 100% sure about that. I think the cut line is probably going to be like -1. So I don't think it's likely that a lot of those guys at +4 are going to make the cut. I mean, -5, you had 0 rounds like that today. So he might be right about that. You might be completely cooked, but I don't think the cut line is going to be even. Let's double check on what Data Golf has the exact cut line at. Probably like +2, +3, right? Let's check that. Yeah, he's got the cut. Well, Data Golf, I should say, not he. It's a whole team of people have the cut line at closer to +2, +3. Yeah, you're not dead if you're at +2 to +4. I mean, you shoot even par +2 and you're within the cut line right there. You shoot +4 and you shoot like a -1, -2 round, and you're going to make the weekend as well. So yeah, I don't think that people are cooked that are at those sort of numbers. Maybe he meant like 2 to 4 shots off the cut line that we're going to be cooked. But yeah, certainly at those scores, it's not the case. Does Fleetwood make the cut? I certainly hope so. That would be nice if he could make the cut. Let's look at the stats, though, because that's always what I default to on those sort of questions. The stat profile is not great. He lost about 2.5 strokes ball striking and actually gained about 2.5 strokes in the short game. I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, I hope that he can make a cut, but this kind of stat profile, I wouldn't count on it. Like, in fact, this kind of stat profile probably makes his chances a little bit worse to go out there and make the weekend. But at +2, he's got to shoot like +1 or better to make the weekend. I think the cut line, if I had to guess, would be +3, especially because I don't think conditions tomorrow are going to be that much easier than today. Maybe a hair easier, but I think it's still going to play like +1, +1.5 for the entire round. Morning Wave might even play closer to like +1.5, +2. If that's the case, +3 cut line, he's got a decent shot to do it, but the stat profile is not great. That's definitely working against him a bit. You're saying +2 is making the cut now, so no. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, top 70 in ties. I believe that's 100% right. But even if it's top 65 in ties, they would have a chance. For sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what he was saying about the +2 to +4s. He might have been thinking something off right there. Tom Kim is the greatest putter alive. Yeah, things that nobody's ever said before. He said that most players will not gain strokes tomorrow and everyone will sit near their position currently. I mean, he's right about that to some extent. Like, it's a very difficult golf course. You're not going to see a whole bunch of under par rounds, but you had a whole handful of people shoot -4 today. Tomorrow, the winds aren't as severe as what they were forecasted for round one. So I think, like I said, scoring is going to be a little bit easier. I think that you're still going to see guys move up the board. Not a ton of them. It's still going to play over par, but certainly not dead if that's the case. Don't guys do well in round two that didn't do well in round one all the time? For sure. Yeah. And that's what we were saying with the shots gained metrics not being the end all be all. So you're 100% right about that. And the exact opposite is true as well, right? Guys that played well round one don't always play well in round number two. So yeah, if you're newer to golf and that wasn't readily apparent, for sure, man, it's pretty fundamental stuff right there, though. I think most of us are well aware of that. Cameron Smith lost the short game, but you don't trust him. Yeah, I don't trust him either, man. He hasn't been good on the Live Tour this year. I don't follow him as much anymore. He used to be one of my favorite players in the world. He did gain 3 strokes approach. Can't completely overlook that. He did lose like a stroke off the tee on hole number 1 as well. So the rest of his round, he actually wasn't that terrible off the tee. I don't know if I trust Cam Smith, but I don't know if you have to trust him at T45. The thing that is great about only being at T45 is that he's not going to be overly chalky. Like, he'll get some ownership because he's better than your average player, but not anything over maybe 4 or 5% ownership at the very most. So if you're going to use a Cam Smith, especially like in a 150 max MME pool, that's like 10% to maybe 15% exposure. If you're getting frisky about it, you don't have to love a Cam Smith, right, to use him in 15% of your lineups. So I think there's a good chance after looking at this stat profile that he makes his way into my 150 max MME exposure, and probably not like single entries, that kind of thing. So like, I wouldn't use him in a cash lineup where you're just trying to finish in the top 50%, but in a large field GPP, like, I mean, if he gains 5 strokes putting, book it. And he loves these fescue greens. If you take a look at his putting stats at the Scottish Open that he played, I believe, 1 time before he left for the Live Tour, and then if you take a look at all of his stats at the Open Championships, he's one of the best putters that we have on this surface. So yeah, a Cam Smith, I wouldn't use him like Cam Smith and the word trust in the same sentence, but I do think he still has some upside. He said the Danish golfers crushed these greens. Let's take a look at the Højgaard twins. They got the Højgaard twins, the Moeller twins, right? So yeah, you were right about those two. 5 shots gained between the two brothers. Let's take a look at Moeller next. I know he's another Danish guy. He lost 2 strokes putting, so they've got to offer some advice to their fellow countrymen. And then who are the other Danish guys in the field? You had Axelrod, right? Or Axelsen. Yeah, he gained 3.5 strokes with a putter. And then who else? Because those aren't the only Danish players. I think there's at least like a couple more. And the other ones go absolutely batshit crazy on the greens. None that I see off the top of my head other than Jakob Skab Olesen. He gained about 2.5 strokes on the greens as well. Yeah, something in those Danish people in these greens, man. They all have themselves this day except for one of them. Your pick is going to be Neiman to win. It's a good dark horse at this point, right? You're not going to the top 5. You're not picking the chalk, which I like, Rico. So no complaints from me. I think that he's got some upside for sure. I think he was probably talking in sarcasm. Yeah, man. Like, I can't imagine that he was saying that like +2 to +4 is dead. I mean, that's on the cut line. So more than likely you're right, Hart. It was most likely sarcasm. He said Brooks could turn it around. He was close, just a few bad shots and short game mistakes. Yeah, I was worried about the injury stuff, but looking at the stats, it doesn't look like the injury was too much of a factor. He gained about 2.4 strokes on approach, just a little bit off the tee. So now that he's gone through a round, I'm okay deploying him in round 2 showdown. I mean, worst case round 2 showdown. Now he screws us over for 1 round, right? It's not like it was for main slate. Our lineups are completely dead if he were to withdraw or just to go out there and miss the cut. I mean, if he sucks tomorrow, sure, it's going to stink that lineup for a round 2 showdown, but that's the kind of exposure that I'm willing to get on these guys that are a little bit injured, where it's not as big of a risk, especially after they already played 18 holes. And a lot of that withdrawal risk kind of gets taken out of the mix. So yeah, a Brooks, the short game could have been a whole lot better. And I don't know, that injury stuff could keep the ownership a little bit lower too. Like that could be a positive to some sense. The cut line, I've got it at +3. Let's go give or take one shot in either direction, though. Louis Oosthuizen in deep dive. So, yeah, I didn't get to see him play this morning. I slept for like 3 hours today, so I'm running on fumes right now. But I went to sleep when he played his last like 12 holes. But he gained off the tee and then lost in the other 3 categories. Him losing almost 3.5, actually, yeah, almost 3.5 strokes with the short game is not something that happens very often. He's usually a much better short game player. The approach play, though, is a little bit concerning, him losing almost 2 strokes in that category. So, I mean, the stat profile overall is, I don't know, like a 4 out of 10. It's not great. I mean, losing in 3 of the 4 categories, it's going to be hard to be better than a below average play. But in large field GPPs, I've seen worse dart throws before, like Louis Oosthuizen. If you take a look at the Open Championship in links history, like that could be a reason for getting to a Louis Oosthuizen. And I believe he also has a later tee time as well. Let me actually just double check on that. Going to my spreadsheet because I have all the tee times on there, which, by the way, they don't have a downloadable tee time sheet, so I had to do them all by hand. That was fun. Literally typing in the tee time for every player took like an hour. It was probably the most infuriating thing I've had to do. He has a tee time at about noon, so that's if the weather is going to be a little bit better for those later players. Again, that's still a massive what if at this point. We're not 100% sure there. Maybe he could be the low end flyer that you're taking. You're saying Harman looks comfy around Portrush. Yeah, there's just something about a Hobbit in these Open Championship type conditions that makes a whole lot of sense. So yeah, he plays well at link style courses outside of even the win at Hoylake. He's been a top 20 machine at these courses. So look for him to continue that this week, I would say. He said you disagree on Colin just because the headspace is bad. You agree with the stats, though? Yeah, I'm just breaking down the stats on it, Ernie. I try to avoid the narratives where I can. You know, that's the beauty about golf and playing DFS and really betting in general when it comes to any of these sports. If you have a hot take about, you know, a player's headspace, then that's always something that you can incorporate yourself. I'm personally more of a stats guy, just kind of like live by the numbers, try and take a lot of the thought out of it. That's what I find successful, right? Just kind of the person that I am. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, was doing that before I got into the DFS space. So I lean into that, right? That's what I'm good at. But hey, if you're good at breaking down the headspaces as players, then right, that's a narrative that you can lean into as well. So I'm not going to give you any pushback if that's your take. Can we deep dive Dietrich and Jesper Svensson? So yeah, Jesper didn't have the best stat profile, but he's a high birdie percentage golfer, so I could see that one. Jesper did gain over 2 strokes ball striking, so I kind of like that. 6.5 out of 10 stat profile. I can't say too much negative there. And then you said Dietrich as well. So let's go to Thomas Dietrich. He gained off the tee. He gained 0.6 on approach and then lost 1.3 with the putter. Another like 5.5, 6 out of 10 stat profile. So especially at lower ownership at T45, he's not going to be getting a whole bunch of steam. I think a Thomas Dietrich could make quite a bit of sense in those large field GPPs. You're saying PM is looking better, you would say. Yeah, I agree with that. I will say, though, that edge is super sketchy, though. Like, I just think today's the best example, right? Like, everyone, all the touts. I just said I didn't know, right? I just threw my hands up. I'm not going to take credit and like pretend like I thought the PM was going to play easier. But all the touts, right? Thought the AM was going to be the easier side. Who knows, man? Like tomorrow could be that same thing. It could just make us look like idiots after the fact, and it would not surprise me. That's just what we get at these Open Championships. How am I feeling about Spieth? He said it seems like a guy who's built for showdown anyways. And he said, thanks for the grind. Of course, Sean, I appreciate the kind words. But yeah, Jordan Spieth is kind of like the Brooks Koepka thing for me. If I'm going to use this sort of player extensively, like I played Jordan for main slate. So I'm a Jordan Spieth fan, though. It doesn't really matter. I'm playing every single time that he tees up. But as somebody that I would like say is a decent player, or maybe like recommend other people, right? That's what I do for my job. So if I was actually going to recommend a Jordan Spieth, it'd be for the showdown format, right? Not main slate where he probably has this blow up round like he's had for the entire year. Jordan Spieth, though, has broken some showdown slates, and he's done it on Sunday quite often. So, you know, if he can make it to the weekend, maybe we save him for Sunday showdown for that smash performance. But how many times this year? It's been at least 3 times to my memory where Jordan Spieth has shot like -6, -7 on Sunday. He's been completely out of the placement point potential, and he's been in optimal play in multiple golf tournaments this year. So, yeah, I think you're preconceived notion that he's a little bit more of a volatile player is backed up by the stats. Stat profile today was all over the place, though. So it's a pure 5 out of 10 stat profile. Doesn't really tell us that much. He gained in one category on approach, with his ball striking, and then lost with the approach play. And then he lost around the green, but gained with the putter. Just complete Jekyll and Hyde. So yeah, stats not telling us much on him. Let's see. He's saying the short game at PGA National. Again, I'm not sure I agree with that one. I'm from South Florida. We play everything in the air with the around the green shots. I mean, you're talking full Flopadopolis. You've got the normal bunkers in South Florida. You're talking about that regular Bermuda rough, that kind of stuff. It's sticky. Link style golf is nothing like that. It's fescue. It's playing along the ground. It's playing slopes. It's playing backstops. It's playing flop shots, but also playing bump and runs, because you can actually play that without the sticky Bermuda grass. I think that comp course stuff, and, I hate to trash on my guy, Pat, because I love what he does. And I agree with, 90% of the stuff that he says, but I'm not sure that I agree with that comp course there. Just as somebody that's from South Florida, has played that golf course, like I said, over 100 times at this point, I see little to no comparison to this week. And that's at least from just how it plays. Like I said, the leaderboard crossover could be a legit thing. I didn't know about that yet. I actually kind of wish I did before the week started, because I would have deep dived it a little bit more. But from how it plays, I don't see it at all, man. Who won the top 10 today? Who in the top 10 you're saying will fall off tomorrow? My apologies for not understanding that one at first. So who's going to fall off up here? It'd be these guys that gained a whole bunch putting. So if you take a look at the putting stats towards the right, the guys that are into this dark green, not every single one of them is going to fall off, but like between a Harris English, a Christian Bezainhout, a Hal Tong, a Skalv Olesen, we're going to exclude Scotty from that. Scotty's a god amongst men. He's immune to falling off. But like a Matthew Jordan, I guess you could say, with him gaining almost 3 strokes in the short game categories, those would be your prime candidates to fall back. The guys that were doing it a little bit unsustainably. And like, I also like to look at the shots gained approach, right? Like guys that kind of struggled with their approach play, also a little bit sketchier. So for example, the guys that gained the least amount of strokes on approach towards the top were Matthew Jordan, also a Mav McNeely. It's fun, the first person that lost strokes putting, at least for the guys that are T10 or better. There aren't any players that lost strokes, but like a Rasmus Højgaard, guys, that only gained 0.15 strokes on approach, but then also gained 2 strokes putting. Those would be the kind of guys that I'd be a little bit sketched out about. So great question. And usually it comes down to the short game regression for me. He said, Nick Taylor cost you $10K today. God bless Canada. Sorry, as they say out there in the Canadians, they're that accent and this whole sorry just drives me nuts. I had a buddy I used to play video games with growing up that was Canadian, and anytime he did something wrong and we all got pissed at him, he hit us with the sorry. Oh boy, it grinds my gears even thinking about it. Why would you ever play Nick Taylor? Must have been a bad DFS tout. Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. I faded him this week because of the ownership, but I don't think it was completely outrageous to play Nick Taylor this week. Like, I didn't do it myself. I thought the ownership was a little bit too high, but he's playing some of the best golf of anyone in the 6K range. So, I wouldn't call that guy crazy at all for using him. Like, in fact, just to show you why people use Nick Taylor this week, look at the shots gained over his last 5 events. +5, +3, +7, +7, +9.4. And I'm sure like the immediate pushback from most people would be like, oh, the fields must have sucked. Nope. Signature field. Nope. Canadian Open, which is the weakest field out of all of them. That's the crazy thing about this. US Open, Travelers, Genesis Scottish Open. It's a really good form that got people onto Nick Taylor. We'll see whether he misses the cut or he ends up making the cut. But if he misses, I won't be that mad about it. Let's put it that way. Got to bump Schmid to 6.9 out of 10. I'm okay with it. And see what you're doing there, my man. Nice. And shout out to DGen as well. He'd be proud of that one. What's going on, Joseph? Yeah, rad track. It's a lot of fun. Of course, DFS King. Let me know if there's any other questions that you've got. Should you run fairways under again on certain players? Yeah, we'll talk about the props later, Rushing. Honestly, I haven't seen the board. I haven't really done any of my analysis on that side yet. So I don't want to give you an answer there just in full earnest, right, until I have that kind of information. So stop on by the prop stream later on and we'll get you hooked up with all that. By the way, guys, prop live stream is going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight on my YouTube channel. It is GSLukeDFS. So if you guys want to check out the underdog and prize pick side, also matchups on sites like DraftKings and FanDuel, make sure to check out my live stream later on. Again, that's on the GSLukeDFS YouTube. He said, what are my top DFS picks to do well for round 2? Yeah, not something that I answer. So I saw your question before there, man. If you guys want to see the exact players that I'm using in my lineups, you can check that out on my Patreon page. But these live streams are a little bit more process-based. He said, yeah, Cam Smith duffed his opening tee shot. Yeah, that was funny. His face, by the way, priceless. He hit him with the, like, oh, wow, what did I just do face? That's something that all of us golfers have done before. So I had a chuckle at that one. You said, what do I think about Hovland for a good round 2? So I hope that he can bounce back because I used him in some lineups. The shots gained profile is about neutral across the board. So yeah, I mean, this is a sleeping giant in my opinion. You know, he didn't do anything terribly today. He lost a little on approach. He lost a little bit with the putter and then gained a little bit with the off the tee play and around the green play. So I was really high on him heading into the week. I took him as somebody for a top 5, even an outright bet. So I obviously thought that he had a good chance to, get the job done around here. At T70, he's going to be lower owned than what he was for main slate now. Right? He's not going to have all of that kind of extra steam after kind of struggling for the first day. So if you liked Victor Hovland at 20% ownership for main slate, then you should love him for round 2 showdown when he's closer to 14, 15% owned. So I personally, as long as the ownership, when I end up running my last set, it isn't anywhere closer to that 15 to 20% mark, there's I'll just say it now, a 100% chance that he'll make my player pool as long as the ownership is reasonable. He said, who in the top 10 does not repeat tomorrow? It gave you a few candidates on that one. And by the way, you only need to ask questions once. I will see them eventually. I just go through them in order. So we'll get to them eventually. He said, I'm full of good information. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, the Olesons and whoever Axelson is, yeah, those Danish guys, they make a whole lot of putts, huh? Louis Oosthuizen is going to get 5 birdies in round 2. You heard it there first from Rico. And if he does, that might pay off that kind of price tag. So I don't think that's the worst thing ever. And yeah, and I don't think that was a bad play at all, Colin. Like, the guy is giving you crap for that. It was not a terrible play. Like, people can dance on the graves of golfers after the fact all they want. I don't do that crap because I know how silly it is. But they don't do it before the fact, right? You won't hear those people telling you ahead of time that they're terrible plays, only after the fact when they can claim that they're correct. So don't worry about it, Colin. It was a high-owned play, but you can play a high-owned play if you differentiate elsewhere. Thoughts and deep dive on Matthew Jordan. I'm a little bit worried that he's short game dependent, Ryan. So I showed the shots gained metrics on him a little bit earlier. He was, I believe, just over 2 shots gained in the short game categories, and then was only a little bit into the positive on approach. He's like a 5 out of 10 stat profile, and it's because of the ownership. He's a little bit higher owned starting in that top 10. He's personally not my favorite play. Like, I would rather take another slapdick in the 6K range. That's half the ownership because he's not starting in the top 10, and he's not going to have as good of shots gained metrics. That's understandable because that's why he's not in the top 10, right? The top 10 guys are going to have good shots gained metrics, but they're also going to be higher owned. Give me somebody, though, that has decent shots gained metrics, just a little bit further down at half that ownership. He says Straka is going to complete the cycle and miss the cut in all 4 majors. I hope not. He said Guy's been frustrating as hell to roster. Yeah, I hope not for his sake, man. I mean, that would be kind of embarrassing given the fact that he's won twice this year. What is he at this point? He's like +2. He's like right around that cut line, I think. +1, so a little bit better. I think he's going to make the cut and nut up, right? And not go 0 for 4. We call that being on the schneid. When you go 0 for 4, you go like 0 for 3 in baseball. Yeah, you don't want to be on the schneid. That's not a good place to be. Let's see. You like Scotty because of his late tee time? Okay. Yeah, I think there's a chance the late side plays a little bit easier. We'll see, though. And he said, but Rahm and Xander are right there, too. Does the ownership compare to Scotty? So I haven't ran all my projections quite yet. They're still in the rough draft process. I have Scotty, Rory, and John Rahm all pretty evenly owned at this point. So the reason for that, by the way, is Rory and John Rahm are a little bit further down the leaderboard. Scotty Scheffler's at -3, so he's the best of all the studs with their score. But Scotty Scheffler's $13,300 as well. So that price tag is going to keep some people off of him because there is a lot of opportunity cost involved with playing a $13,000 golfer, especially when the pricing only goes down to $6,000. It's not like main slate where pricing went the whole way down to $5,000. Main slate, by the way, the top 3 players combined ownership was about 95% because of the way that salary works, which I can't wait to see some of the other DFS sites, by the way, that still have the top 3 players at like 100% combined ownership. Because if you do that, then you spend like an extra $1,000 in your projections. Like the average salary use would be like $51,500. To account for that, the reason why Scotty is not 30% owned anymore, and I have him closer to like 23, 24% owned, is because of the salary component. Because you don't have guys that you can use in the 5K range anymore. It literally doesn't exist. It's harder to fit them into lineups, and thus less people are going to be getting to Scotty Scheffler. So ownership is pretty flat. Xander Schauffele is a little bit lower owned than the big 3 up top, but it's not by that not by that much, I should say. It's like a 5 to 6% gap from Xander Schauffele up to those top 3 players. So hopefully that answers your question. Of course, rushing, you're the goated viewer. A lot of goated viewers, though, so I don't know if we can single you out. There's a few people that might take offense to that. Kokrak was really lining them up on the greens, kind of mid-tee to green. Yeah, feels like a fade for me then, Ross. He was kind of sketchy heading in. And if he was short game dependent, then that's going to be a no for me. Is it how do we pick players for the second round? So if you want the information on that, actually we covered that in full detail about 20 minutes ago. If you scroll back on the live stream and go back to like minus 20 minutes, it'll give you the literal exact information that you're looking for. So just scroll back and let me know if you have any questions after you do that. Is a question on these random new guys. Do I tend to just fade them regardless of the stat profile? Most of the time, yeah. Like that Cameron kid that I literally don't know who he is. Like the stats look great, but like, do I really want to play a guy that I've never heard of before? No, I don't. That kid that's from Estonia that hits the ball a long way, that was doing the long drive competition with Bryson. That's the kid, by the way, that Tedder kid, the one ball striking popper that we saw. Like, is very, very rare that I'll play a guy like that. Like maybe I'll see them on the broadcast. I'll hear a thing or two from the broadcast that talks them up, maybe gives me some of the background information that I need. But if I quite literally the first time I saw their name is when going through the shots gained metrics, I don't play them. Like, and that's because I'm different than most people that are going through the shots gained metrics too, right? This isn't some like regular golf fan that goes through the shots gained metrics like, oh, it's a new name that I haven't seen before. I hate, and I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here too much, but I eat, live, and sleep golf. Like I've slept 2 hours today because I stayed up just watching the golf the whole time. Absolute psychotic stuff. If I haven't heard of the guy before, then who the hell is this dude? Like he's not even like some potential prospect, right? That we've seen around very often. That's why I stay away from them, because if I haven't heard of the guy before, then yeah, there's probably a good reason for that. With Bryson whiffing it today, do I think he'll bounce back or should you stay away? I'm a little sketched out by the links course history, man. So I don't want to say like never say never, but that's why I did avoid him for my main slate lineups. But with such a high upside player, such a high pedigree player, if anyone's going to just figure it out overnight from losing 4 strokes approach to gaining, it would be Bryson DeChambeau. But I did hear that the golf ball that he was planning on using this week did not end up coming in time, or he didn't end up getting it approved in time for the Open Championship. And I hate to make excuses for Bryson, but he is so particular with his equipment that there's a chance that that's why he couldn't hit any of his irons today. So I'm sketched out by it, but he is super low owned, and that is a big benefit in some spots. He said really good info on Hovland, of course. Yeah, Estonia. And I don't think you spelled his name there right, Ross, but I know what you're saying. You said you forgot where you heard it. Maybe it was on Full Swing, but Lowry said he hates playing in the rain. And he said it's a little bit of a drizzle tomorrow, so who knows? Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone likes playing in the rain. I saw the interview that he actually mentioned that in, Ryan. They were asking him about like his reputation for being a mudder. And he's like, I'm from South Florida. I live in Palm Beach now. He lives in Jupiter, just down the road from me. He's like, I don't like playing in the rain. He's like, when it rains here in Florida, we don't play golf, which I can attest to. South Floridians do not play golf when it's raining outside. Yeah, he's not an Irishman anymore. He's been acclimated to America for far too long. Yeah, man. We're running on fumes. We're on coffee number 4 at this point, but we'll make do. You said Luke, live golf. Is that the sign that you're talking about? The Luke live golf thing? Like instead of what's the sign? It's like live, laugh, something, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about? The Karen sign that you see in all the kitchens of like middle-aged women, middle-aged housewives, right? That all have that sign. We all know that we're talking about, but I don't know the exact saying there. And he said, you haven't heard of these guys and you haven't, his family members play them in Showdown. Yeah. So I think you're spot on about that. The only people that use some of these random guys are either people that are close to them, or like in the case of like some of the DP World Tour players that are super young that I've never heard of before. Maybe you're from Europe, you only follow the DP World Tour. Like there's some of those players, some of those really like low owns, like Riggs Johnson, for example, that you might play if you're a DP World Tour fan. But yeah, not if you're a PGA Tour fan like myself. He said, remember the Honda Classic where Straka beat Lowry in the rain? Dude, maybe that's why he doesn't like the rain, is because at the Honda Classic, he got absolutely shafted on the last hole. That was a fun ending to watch as a fan, but I had to get a brand new phone after that because like you said, a monsoon came through and literally broke my iPhone. So that was fun, but an expensive golf tournament, to say the least. All right, let's talk about some of the contests available and then wrap this up with some lineup construction. Hit me up with any last-second questions that you've got, which we'll go through after we go through this strategy here. And also smash the like button if you guys haven't already. But the contests are a little bit better than most Showdown slates. I mean, normally these contests like the Sand Trap are like 200K total. Now it's 300K, but the issue with it is that it's super top heavy. Like they have all the casuals playing this week. They know that the people that never play golf DFS have no idea what a sustainable contest looks like. And they know that the people that are going to be sitting on the toilet tonight looking at their DraftKings pool love seeing 100K prizes. They love that. They eat that shit up, right? They go, oh, I don't care if second place is a fourth of first place. I just think I'm going to win first place against 14,000 other entries. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it is very unlikely that you're going to take a single bullet and take down a 14,000 entry contest. So let's say that you have a really good lineup, right? You have 5 of the 6 of the absolute nuts, but you have one guy who only scores like 20 points tomorrow. Let's say he shoots like even par. Well, in that case, let's say you finish in second, like you have the second best possible lineup. You're going to win 25 grand instead of 100K to first place. This 4X drop off is disgusting. I mean, literally, you can add up the prizes for, let's see, the first like 12 people, I think, and you'd end up getting the 100K that you're getting for first place. This kind of payout structure is the exact opposite of what you want. And especially when it's in a 14,000 entry contest and you're playing against people with 150 lineups. What you want to see is more sustainable payout structures. So this isn't great, but this is a little bit better. This is a 25K prize pool. So out of the total amount of entries, you have 25K in prizes, and it's a fifth to first place. So 20% as opposed to the 33% that we had in the last contest. And the result of that is that the top 5 now constitutes the payouts. Actually, sorry, the next 3 positions constitute the payout of what you had at first, rather than first being the entire like top 12. I mean, like it's the more top heavy it is, the grosser those payout structures get. But the ones that are the absolute nuts, so that contest we just went through was a little bit better, but it's still not the ideal one. The ones that you really want to enter and the ones that you're going to see filling the quickest on DraftKings, just because everyone kind of knows they're the best contests and they're the ones that people want to prioritize, are ones where it's 10% to first. So this is the 3K Albatross. This is a $12 single entry. So you're not playing against people with 150 lineups, right? If you're a single entry player, that's good. You don't want to play against the Sharks. They have 150 different combinations. And because this is 10% to first place, second place is $200. It's over half of first, right? Way better than those other GPPs. Third place is half of first place. And remember, that big 100K contest, it went 100K, then 25K to second place. And I know we all like to think that we're going to have the absolute nut-in lineup in these large field GPPs, but have some semblance of realism. Like, you know, I like to be optimistic. I like to think that we've got a good chance to see our names at the top end of GPPs. And normally we do, right? The amount of SHIPIT logos, the amount of people from these live streams that we see in that top 5, top 10 every single slate is ridiculous. But on an individual basis, right? individual person is not hitting a top 5, top 10 every single slate. It's just not realistic. If they were, they'd be the greatest DFS player alive, and they would just be an absolute money printer. It's a lot harder than I think a lot of people give it credit for. So when you have a good lineup that's not the absolute nuts, make it count, right? When you have that top 5, hit something for like 10 to 20x your payout. Hit something that actually matters, like 30 to 50x if you're finished in second place. And some of those big GPPs, don't make it where like you had a really good lineup, you finished in 5th place, and you hardly got like double or triple your money back for what you ended up entering. So make sure that the contest you're entering are as flat as possible. That would be my main recommendation. And there's other GPPs you can look at as well. So like some other single entries that are closer to 10%. Even some of the smaller field GPPs have some good payout structures too. But the flatter the top 5, top 10, in my opinion, the better. And next up, we're going to talk about how to actually put together lineups, which, because it's round 2 and 3 showdown and we don't have the placement points, it mostly entails making sure that we have enough differentiation in our builds so that we're not duplicating ourselves with a whole bunch of other entries. We want to make sure that we're not going to be sharing first place with like 2 to 3 other people. And we also want to make sure that when our plays get there, that we're not sharing them with 25% each time. Because let's say you have a core of 3 players that all smash for an optimal play tomorrow, but they're all 35% owned. If you use those 3 players together, that's, we're going to have a 3-on-3 at that point, essentially versus like 3 to 5% of the field. And it's probably even more than that, because a lot of the people that play chalk love playing chalk together. It's like an ignorance is bliss kind of thing, right? Where like the people that don't know about chalk being an issue will just play all the chalk together because they don't account for it whatsoever. So even though like the implied ownership of taking like 33% owned players together is about 3.33%, even though it's that low of a number. In reality, if you're taking 3 chalky players like that together, you might have 5 to 10% of the field that you're playing a 3-on-3 against. A 3v3 against 10% of, let's say, 14,000 entries. 10% of 14,000 entries is 1,500 entries, right? Just a little bit under 1,500. You're entering a 3-on-3 versus 1,500 other people is going to be very, very difficult to get any sort of differentiation with those last 3 players, because you only have so many combinations of players you can use for those last 3. And assuming that you're spending somewhere near your total amount of salary, you can see why it becomes an issue playing all of that chalk. So our main issue becomes making sure that we're not going to duplicate ourselves, and making sure that we're not going to pigeonhole ourselves into a situation where we're with a 3-on-3 versus like 10% of the field together. So for our lineups, it's mostly worrying about that aspect. And then also the weather too, right? The weather, I think, is a little bit volatile. Maybe you could stack a few, early lineups, right? Go to like, a lineup with 6 guys in the first 3-hour tee times. Maybe you take like 5 to 10 lineups and you take only 6 guys going the last 3-hour tee times. Most of my lineups, though, are going to be played pretty straight up. They're not going to have a weather lean, but in this kind of situation where, today it was a 1.3 stroke advantage that not a lot of people saw coming, ended up being, about 1.28 strokes between the first and the second half. You might want to account for that in some of your lineups too. So you can use that weather edge, especially in large field GPPs, for a small subset of your exposure, kind of building in sets like Tambo says, where you'll take like small subsets of your exposure and build it in a very specific way. That's probably the best way to play the weather here. But for the sake of this lineup, we're not going to focus on that. We're more so just going to look at the ownership angle and make sure that we get enough differentiation. So let's start with a Jon Rahm up top. So we're going to go with a little bit of a chalkier start just to show you that up top, even if you play some ownership, it's not the end of the world. So let's go Jon Rahm, Straka as our second man in. And then that's I'd say a relatively high owned start with those 2. Our last 4 spots are where most of our differentiation is going to come in. In fact, I'm going to throw in a Joaquin Niemann as well, just to further kind of make the ownership more difficult. But what we have here by using Rahm, Straka, Niemann is we don't have the mega chalk altogether, right? This isn't 30%, 30%, 30%. This is like 28%, 12%, 15%. This is just general ideas on where I think the ownership is going to come in on those 3 players. But because it's not 30, 30, 30, it's a little bit more reasonable. And now with our last 3 spots, we can get that differentiation that we need there. So like maybe it's a Ben Griffin for a bounce back, just a high pedigree player this year that is maybe being a little bit overlooked. Got the Brooks ball striking stats that you can lean into. And then for your last man in here, as long as it's somebody that's also sub 5 to 7% owned, Griffin should be sub 10%. Brooks Koepka with the injury kind of news will probably be sub 5% as well. Like I think a lot of people just won't be willing to get there because of that news. Your last man in here, if it's another leverage piece, you're going to have enough differentiation to not duplicate yourself in most cases, but also so that you can move up the leaderboard when your players hit. The situation that you kind of want to avoid is if you were a little bit chalkier towards the top. So maybe rather than going with like a Straka who's a little bit lower owned, you played, let's see, let's go with a Matty Fitz there. And then let's also throw in a Lowry at $9,300. If your chalk was Rahm, Fitz, and Lowry, which is probably an extra 10, maybe, probably about extra 10% ownership with your top 3 players, your leverage pieces, you might have to be slightly more careful about it, right? You might have to like really force your hand to like a Patrick Reed at +6. You may have to take some super ugly plays like a Cam Young at +3, rather than guys that were closer to even par and +1 that had much more reasonable shots gained profile. So the idea is in large field GPPs is that you have to, balance the ownership angle. If you're going to have higher owned plays at one point, you've got to offset it with lower owned plays down the line. And that's why if you make an ownership pivot towards the top end of the board, it can sometimes be a really nice thing to do, because then it gives you extra flexibility and extra extra leeway is the word I was looking for, towards the middle, towards the bottom end of the pricing, to use somebody that's a little bit higher owned. And in a showdown format where we have so much variance, it's the hardest to predict sport over an entire event, but especially so when we're only looking at 18 holes. You want to get as much leverage as you possibly can into these lineups. So that's all I've got for the round 2 live stream, guys. I'm going to go over any last second questions or player pool deep dives that you might have. But if this is all that we've got here, best of luck with all of your exposure. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those contests. Make sure to check out my prop and betting live stream a little bit later on tonight. That is going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time on my YouTube channel. It is GSLukeDFS, where you guys can find all the underdog and prize pick stuff for tomorrow. Also, all the matchups on the sports books. And make sure to check out my Patreon page also for all my projections for round 2 showdown. On there, I have all my ownership projections, my entire player pool. We obviously mentioned my process for my player pool, but you can see the actual players that I'm getting to on my Patreon page. And also make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation website for all of the projections later on too. They've got the Stone, which is the absolute stone cold nuts. On there, you've got round 2 historical, also a lot of shots gained analysis, a lot of tools that kind of make your life easier with combing through the shots gained metrics, as well as all of their projections and content for round 2 showdown. But it's looking like a good one. Round 2 showdown is normally one of the higher ROI slates that we have as a community. It's because the game theory matters. You can take a stance against the rest of the field and oftentimes find a lot of success. So don't be afraid to get a little nasty with your builds, to get to some real low-owned players to offset that chalk, and let's have ourselves a slate. But he said, who is Christopher? You saw him play today. Is he sneaky good? So Christopher Wrighton is, I'm assuming, who you're talking about there. He's a very talented player. So he showed up at the Genesis last week. He had a T13 finish. That was an elite tier field. Don't sleep on him. He's an absolute stud. He said his name's Mock Lovin. I'm not sure who you're talking about with that, but all right. He said, you think those are real far back after the first round, either put too much pressure on themselves to play perfect or just mail it in? He said, so it's hard for you to play any of them. Well, that's not really how golf works, Grant. Like, I kind of understand what you're saying, but every single time we play showdown, like, this isn't like a one-off thing, right? Every golf tournament that we play, there are guys that struggle in round number 1 that play great in round number 2. But at the same time, there are also a lot of guys where it backs up your theory there, where they struggle in round 1 and then they struggle in round 2. In hindsight, it's always really easy to us to point at those guys and go like, oh, he was out of the cut line anyways, right? He wasn't going to care, and then overlook the guys that were over par and then end up sneaking into the cut line. I think a lot of that is just confirmation bias, that psychological effect where you kind of like see what you're looking for. Because on these live streams, I mean, we've been doing this for the whole last year at this point together. We show countless examples of the exact opposite happening. So if that's something that you found in your process, maybe it's a little bit of a bias that you have. I would try to work against that as much as you can, because if you're just playing the top end of the leaderboard for round 2 and thinking that that's going to pay off, that is not a viable long-term strategy. In fact, that is how you build negative EV lineups. That's how you, I hate to like be too, brutal about it, but that's the way that fish build lineups, right? That's the way that they go out there, take high-owned lineups, kind of pay the rake in those large field GPPs. You don't want to be one of those people. He said, stop talking, answer questions. I'm just going to ban you, bro. Frankly, you don't tell me what to do, boss man. So I'm just going to send you on your way. Best of luck, though, with everything that you're doing. You're not going to boss me around, though. That's definitely a no-go. KJ Choi misses the cut. You heard it here first. Yeah, those are the kind of hot takes that we like. Huh? What, a +8 guy not making it to the weekend? What did he end up shooting today, by the way? A good old +10. Poor KJ Choi. Guy's an absolute legend. He said if they were taking top 5 or top 10 every slate, they would be printing money. He said, yeah, his name's Mark Lovin. Gotcha. Yeah, you said that a little bit after the fact, or maybe I caught the comment after you did, so I wasn't sure what you were talking to. He said if they were taking top 5 or top 10 every slate, they'd be printing money. He doesn't do that every single slate, Brian. So I've seen his ROI before. He makes a whole lot of money because he's a volume player on DFS, but he certainly doesn't win top 5 or top 10 in every single GPP. In fact, I beat him this week in some head-to-heads. I've beaten him before in head-to-heads before. He's far from unbeatable, to put it lightly. And yeah, he is a DFS god, but he's beatable at the same time. I like some McKibben. He's got that home course history going, so don't sleep on him. He made a lot of birdies today. He had an eagle as well, so the scoring was there. Always embracing the chaos. You know the deal. Of course, Ross. Of course, Kep. Appreciate the kind words. And yeah, man, I'm just trying to give you some advice too, right, Grant? Like, I do this professionally. I've done this for 5 years at this point. I've seen the people in chat that always say like, oh, they didn't play well one way, didn't play well the first day, they can't do it the next. You know, tomorrow I'll make it a case in point, right, to point out some of those players. There will be at least 5, 10, maybe even close to 15, 20 guys that shot +2 or worse that shoot something under par tomorrow. So don't be afraid to get a little bit nasty. At the same time, that also doesn't mean get nasty with every play, right? Not everyone that you use has to be somebody that you're using at low ownership to get leverage on, but there's always guys that get there after a bad day. So I wouldn't hold it against those players too much. He said, also, thanks for giving Brendan the boot. Yeah, man, I gave him a little bit of a chance for a few comments, right? And then he just ended up being a dick after like 3 or 4 of them. So we got him out of there, right? You got to cut the cancer out at some point, right? If people want to be a toxic person, then we're just going to get him out of here. It's just nowhere even worth keeping him around. He said, that's probably why you're losing your ass in DFS. That is probably why, Grant. I hate to be like the brutal, honest truth there, right? And again, I'm doing this out of a place of love. You don't want to be overly reactionary. And it's probably the best piece of advice I could give for DFS. And there's one real reason for that, right? If you're reactionary after like an 18 hole sample size, then you're going to be doing what everyone else is doing. And because it's golf and we have such a hard time handicapping it for any given rounds, you don't want to be sharing and holding hands with everyone. Like, you want to be distancing yourselves from as many people as possible on your takes, because if everyone's going to have a hard time picking the right crew, when you get the right plays right, you want to be the only guys that have them. So that's something that you might want to consider. It may help you out. Let me know how it works out if you do it for round 2. He said, what's my DraftKings name? Let's play a head-to-head tomorrow. Yeah, ask me, Ryan. It's GS Luke. It's the exact username that you see on here on YouTube. And yeah, I'm cool with it, Ryan. And by the way, you seem like an awfully confrontational person. You just might want to chill out a little bit, my man. It's DFS. We're trying to have fun. Ross says, one of those that can shoot under par could be KJ Choi. He's still going to miss the cut. Yeah, at +10, I don't think he's going to shoot a -9 to make the cut. That'd be a course record 62 in an Open Championship. I think your miss the cut parlay on KJ Choi there, Ross, is pretty safe heading into tomorrow. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with all of your exposure that you're taking. I will be patiently awaiting your head-to-head requests, by the way. Don't be afraid to send it to me. I will accept anything under $1,000. So let me know about that. Send it to me if you're all game about it. And I'll see you guys for the round 2 live stream tomorrow night.